A judge fined Taylor Swift for wearing a cross in court. What she calmly said next brought silence to the room and tears to many eyes. The courtroom in downtown Manhattan was unusually packed that morning. A thick air of curiosity filled the room, not because of the case itself, but because Taylor Swift had just walked in. She wasn't there as a celebrity or a performer. Today, she was a witness in a copyright dispute involving one of her own songs. Dressed professionally in a navy suit, her expression calm and focused, she took her seat at the front. Around her neck hung a small gold cross, subtle but visible against her blouse. She wasn't trying to make a statement. It was something she always wore, something personal. Reporters sat scattered in the back rows, careful not to break courtroom protocol, but clearly eager to see if anything newsworthy would happen. Lawyers shuffled papers, whispered to each other. The opposing side seemed unusually smug, as if expecting her to crack under legal pressure. But Taylor's demeanor remained unshaken, her eyes fixed ahead. Judge Horace Melvin entered, his presence commanding. Known for being strict and at times unnecessarily sharp, he looked around the courtroom with the weight of someone who enjoyed control. His gaze landed on Taylor and didn't move. A moment passed, then another. You could feel the energy shift, as if the temperature in the room dropped slightly. Taylor noticed too, but didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her posture, her fingers brushing the chain around her neck. Then the judge cleared his throat sharply. The tone of the morning was about to change, and no one saw it coming. Before the court clerk could even finish calling the case, Judge Melvin leaned slightly forward, his tone sharp. "Miss Swift," he said, voice cutting through the quiet room. "I need to address something before we proceed." Taylor looked up, slightly puzzled, nodding respectfully. The judge's eyes weren't on her face. They were fixed on the cross around her neck. "That necklace," he continued, "is a religious symbol. This courtroom must remain neutral. I'm instructing you to remove it." The words dropped like a weight. A quiet stir passed through the room. Even the attorneys sitting nearby glanced at one another, unsure of what they'd just heard. Taylor sat still for a second. She wasn't expecting this. She glanced down at the necklace, then looked back up. "Your Honor," she replied gently, "it's a part of who I am. I wear it every day. It doesn't interfere with these proceedings." The judge didn't blink. "Neutrality must be maintained. If you refuse, I will issue a fine." His voice had no hesitation. The courtroom, moments ago just a setting for a copyright case, now felt like the center of something much bigger. Taylor didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply replied, "I respect the court, but I can't remove it." Without another word, Judge Melvin gave a nod to the clerk. "Issue the fine." A pen scratched paper. Taylor was officially fined for a necklace. Gasps were heard. Reporters scribbled. One of the lawyers dropped his pen. The courtroom wasn't just watching a legal case anymore. They were witnessing something far more personal. Taylor didn't shift in her seat, but something inside her had. She hadn't come to court for a fight, but it had clearly found her. And now the quiet tension was just beginning to build. Taylor took a quiet breath, her fingers resting calmly on the table in front of her. The fine had been issued. The judge had moved on, flipping to the opening statements of the case, expecting her to let it slide. But she didn't. Not out of pride, not out of anger, but out of something deeper. A feeling that this moment wasn't just about her. "Your Honor," she said, her tone steady and respectful, "before we proceed, I'd like to formally respond to the fine placed on me." The judge looked up, clearly annoyed. "Miss Swift, this is a copyright dispute, not a forum for personal complaints." "I understand that," she replied, maintaining her composure, "but I believe this involves more than a personal issue. It concerns my constitutional rights, and I'd like it noted on the record." The room stilled again. The court reporter glanced up from her keys. Even the opposing counsel leaned in slightly. Taylor wasn't raising her voice, She wasn't being dramatic. She was simply standing her ground, with grace. "I'm not here to create disruption," she continued. "But this cross, this small piece of jewelry, has nothing to do with the legal matter we're discussing today. It's part of my daily life, and unless it causes harm or interferes with the process, I don't believe wearing it justifies a financial penalty." Judge Melvin narrowed his eyes but didn't interrupt. He hadn't expected this, not from her. Taylor wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't trained to argue in court, but there was strength in the way she spoke, clarity in her reasoning. She wasn't emotional. She was precise. She wasn't just defending herself. She was drawing a quiet but powerful line, and everyone in the room could feel it. Something important had just shifted. Taylor leaned forward just slightly, her voice soft but unwavering. "Your Honor, may I briefly cite 2 legal precedents for the record?" There was a long pause. Judge Melvin's fingers tensed on his gavel, but he didn't stop her. The courtroom leaned in, curious. No one expected a pop star to speak this way, not with such quiet command. She pulled a single folded paper from her folder. "The first is Tinker vs. Des Moines, 1969. The court ruled that students do not shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. It emphasized that peaceful, personal expression cannot be punished without clear disruption." Melvin didn't respond. Taylor continued. "The second is West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, 1943. That case protected students who refused to salute the flag, reinforcing that no government institution can force a person to compromise personal beliefs." She placed the paper gently in front of her, not reading anymore, just speaking. "I'm not disrupting anything, Your Honor. I didn't speak out or break decorum. I was sitting quietly, listening. The only thing you called out was my necklace." There was no arrogance in her tone, no performance. It was as if she'd simply rehearsed her rights in the quiet of her home, just in case one day she might need them. And now, that moment had arrived. The judge shifted in his seat. The courtroom was unusually still. One of the opposing lawyers scribbled something quickly, possibly reconsidering the day's strategy. Even the bailiff looked up, expression unreadable. Taylor met the judge's eyes. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for fairness." There was weight in her words. It wasn't just about jewelry. It was about the right to quietly be who you are, even when standing in front of power. And now that power had been challenged, not by shouting, not by protest, but by clarity, calm, and courage. Judge Melvin sat back slowly in his chair, his hands folding together in front of him. His gaze drifted from Taylor to the quiet crowd now fully tuned in, not just to a legal argument, but to something that felt deeply personal. For the first time that morning, his confidence didn't look so steady. He had expected compliance, not resistance, and certainly not from someone like her. He cleared his throat, buying time. "Miss Swift, I appreciate your references, but this is a courtroom, not a classroom," he said, his tone clipped. But it lacked the firmness he'd started with. Taylor didn't flinch. She stayed composed, respectful, but unmoved. "If courtrooms are bound by the Constitution, then what's learned in a classroom matters here too," she said quietly. There was no trace of sarcasm, just truth. She had made her point, carefully, legally, and without raising her voice. The courtroom shifted. Reporters exchanged glances, typing faster. A young clerk at the corner of the room subtly nodded, as if silently agreeing. It wasn't just Taylor's fame holding attention anymore. It was the fact that she had managed to turn a judge's actions into the center of the debate. Judge Melvin looked down at his notes, but everyone knew his focus was broken. The authority he had walked in with was now being questioned, not by force, but by logic. Then Taylor added one final note, gently. "If this fine stands, it sends a message, not just to me, but to anyone who quietly wears their beliefs. That line hit deeper than the legal cases. The judge's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He didn't have an answer. And for the first time in that courtroom, his silence said more than any ruling ever could. Judge Melvin tapped his pen twice against the desk, the rhythm uneven. He avoided eye contact as he shifted through his papers. Then, with a tight jaw, he finally spoke. "The fine is rescinded," he muttered, almost under his breath. A pause swept across the courtroom. No clapping, no loud reactions, just a collective breath held, then quietly released. Taylor didn't smile or celebrate. She nodded once, respectfully, then sat back in her chair. Her cross still hung around her neck, untouched. It should have ended there, but it didn't feel like an ending. The judge had backed down, yes, but his expression carried something else. Not relief, not understanding. Something colder, something unfinished. Across the aisle, the opposing attorney seemed confused. The court reporter kept typing, her eyes not leaving the page. Even the security guard near the back glanced toward Taylor with a look that could only be described as impressed. As the hearing finally moved on, Taylor remained focused. She had come for a copyright case, and she was ready to deal with it. But deep down, she knew this moment wasn't over. The judge might have dropped the fine, but he hadn't forgotten the challenge, and Taylor could feel it in her gut. This wasn't just a courtroom disagreement. This was something that might follow her outside these walls, something quiet but sharp. She straightened her notes, her voice calm when she next spoke. But in the back of her mind, one truth had settled in. She had won a battle, but the war was still coming. The next morning, Taylor arrived at her legal team's office, expecting to prep quietly for the remainder of the case. Instead, her lead counsel, Erica, met her at the door with a folder in hand and concern in her eyes. "We just received this," she said, handing over the document. Taylor read the first few lines. It was a formal complaint, filed by Judge Melvin. It accused her of disrupting courtroom proceedings, challenging judicial authority inappropriately, and undermining courtroom decorum. Taylor read it twice, slowly, the words sinking in, not with shock, but with clarity. This wasn't about courtroom rules. This was retaliation, plain and simple. "He's trying to flip the story," Erica said, her voice low. "He couldn't win in front of everyone, so now he's doing it behind closed doors." Taylor nodded, her face unreadable. It was exactly what she'd sensed in the courtroom the day before. The look in the judge's eyes, the cold final glance before he dismissed the session. He hadn't let it go. He was trying to punish her, not with fines, but with bureaucracy. The complaint would trigger a formal review. It meant paperwork, statements, possible hearings. It meant her name would sit in front of a panel, not as a witness or a plaintiff, but as a problem. Taylor set the paper down gently. "He wants to scare me," she said, "and keep others from speaking next time." Erica nodded. "So what now?" Taylor looked up, steady as ever. "Now we go public, on our terms." Taylor didn't waste time. Within an hour, she was on a secure call with an old friend, Sarah Lennox, a respected journalist known for holding power to account. Sarah had covered serious legal stories before, and more importantly, she had integrity. Taylor laid it all out, every detail from the fine to the complaint. She didn't add drama. She didn't need to. "He's using the system to punish you because you stood your ground," Sarah said, almost stunned. "I'll run this. Properly." By evening, the story hit national headlines. Judge files complaint against Taylor Swift after rescinding controversial fine. News outlets from every corner picked it up, but it wasn't just her fame driving clicks. It was the principle. A young woman calmly defending her rights, only to face silent punishment behind closed doors, struck a chord with people far beyond the courtroom. Social media exploded. Lawyers, professors, and fans alike weighed in. Hashtags trended. Legal experts called the judge's actions deeply troubling. Others began sharing stories of facing similar treatment, most without a platform to push back. Taylor's team issued a simple statement that night. This is not about fame or privilege. It's about the quiet rights we all carry with us, and the danger when those in power try to take them away. The message spread fast. Taylor wasn't playing the victim. She wasn't looking for revenge. She was doing what she always did, turning a moment of pain into something that could help someone else. And that made it powerful. Within 24 hours, the story had moved from celebrity news into serious national conversation. Morning shows, legal podcasts, and evening panels were all asking the same question. Did the judge cross the line? A constitutional law professor from Yale called it a quiet abuse of power hiding behind courtroom protocol. Civil rights groups issued statements backing Taylor and demanding a formal review of the judge's conduct. Even those who weren't fans of her music found themselves agreeing. This wasn't about fame. It was about freedom. On social media, the debate spread like wildfire. Some defended the judge, calling it courtroom discipline. But most saw the truth. A woman had been targeted for something personal, something peaceful, and had calmly stood her ground. The court of public opinion had spoken. Taylor had exposed something much bigger than herself. And now the pressure wasn't just on the judge. It was on the entire system. Under growing pressure, the Judicial Review Board launched an inquiry into Judge Melvin's actions. His public statement felt cold and rehearsed, but it didn't stop the damage. His reputation took a sharp hit, and lawyers began quietly requesting reassignment from his court. Respect, once automatic, had quickly started to fade. Later that night, Taylor sat alone in her dressing room, the stage lights dim behind the curtain. Her cross still hung gently around her neck, exactly where it had always been. She hadn't planned for any of this, hadn't wanted the spotlight to shift this way. But she knew, deep down, she had done the right thing, not just for herself, but for anyone who's ever been told to shrink who they are to fit someone else's comfort. She didn't win through power or fame. She won by standing still, speaking softly, and refusing to let fear speak louder than truth. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more real stories that matter. And if you want to hear more powerful moments like this one, check out the videos now appearing on your screen. You won't want to miss them.